Hello, I'm Linda Graham, author of Resilience, Powerful Practices for Bouncing Back from Disappointment, Difficulty, and even Disaster. In this series of conversations on resilience, you will learn from many experts offering practices that have been helpful to them in recovering their own resilience. In this conversation with Jonah Paquette, we're learning the importance when cultivating resilience as a skill, as a muscle of the mind, to allow ourselves to be human, to lean on others even when that isn't easy, to nurture ourselves in nature, to nurture ourselves with humor and play, and to cultivate the gratitude for life that can turn even the darkest moments into real gifts. Welcome to this conversation exploring resources for recovering resilience. Today I'm speaking with Jonah Paquette. Jonah is a clinical psychologist at Kaiser Permanente in the San Francisco Bay Area, where he oversees the mental health training programs across 4 medical centers. Jonah is the author of Real Happiness and the Happiness Toolbox, and he's currently writing a 3rd book on awe. Jonah teaches around the country on positive psychology, happiness, and well-being, and we met happily teaching at some of the same venues. So Jonah, thank you for joining us today. Very, very glad to have you here.
I'm really honored to be here with you today, and just want to thank you for both giving me the time to be here with you, and also just for the listeners and viewers at home. You've been, initially such an inspiration for me professionally, but in more recent months and years, become a real friend and someone that I'm just thrilled to know. So great to be here with you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that. So if we understand resilience to be facing and dealing with challenges and crises in our lives, having the capacities to cope skillfully and effectively with everyday disappointments and even extraordinary disasters, do you have an example from your own experience or someone you know of having to bounce back from adversity, and what was helpful at the time to cope resiliently?
An example that just comes to mind that I know that you know about, but I'm happy to share, is both personal and somebody that I know, which was around about 7.5 years ago, when my wife was unexpectedly and kind of incidentally diagnosed with a brain tumor. And it was, she was having headaches for some time, but otherwise was totally healthy. And it turned out the headaches had absolutely nothing to do with the brain tumor, but she was told that she had a very malignant and aggressive type of tumor that had to be treated and operated on immediately. So within weeks, we went from life as normal to, are we going to have a life together? Is she going to have much time? We didn't really know. There was so much uncertainty. So I think that time it jumps out, initially as one of the darkest moments of our time together, but actually, in full honesty, we talk about now very openly. We go and actually talk sometimes to cancer survivor groups as a duo about this, that it's something that we look at as almost as a real gift. But when we think about what allowed it to be a gift, was it's so easy in life to get caught up on anything, worries and stress and bills and money and time. And everything just slowed down for us. And I think, if I had to put words on what really helped us to be resilient and bounce back during that time period, it was really first a sense of gratitude towards each other, but also for life. That I remember very distinctly being at Point Reyes together and looking out over the Pacific Ocean, and there's just this moment of awe, but shared together, and feeling like, hey, none of us are guaranteed tomorrow, but how can we really be present and grateful and connected today? So I think between gratitude for each other, between just slowing down and being in the now and knowing that we can't control anything else, and having that perspective of what's important, I think more than anything that really helped us. And it's still a work in progress 7.5 years later, but to help us really remind ourselves of what matters, and to not sweat the small stuff as much. I think it's natural to do that, but as much as we used to.
Very wise. Do you have a particular go-to practice that fairly reliably helps you recover your resilience?
For me personally, and I think it's probably common to a lot of people here in the San Francisco Bay Area, but for me, being in nature has always been a go-to, if you want to call it practice, or just a habit that I try to remember when I am feeling overwhelmed, when I'm feeling stressed, if I'm feeling stretched thin, to kind of build in, whether it's a hike or just a trip out to the beach or just being in the woods. That I think sort of partially the physical activity component, but really just being around the greenery and being around nature for me is just so healing. I can feel it in my body when I do that. And you mentioned obviously at the outset my interest in awe that I'm writing about, and I think for me that sort of nature as a muse for moments of awe is something that I really turn to as well. So there are others, but I think for me that's the one that jumps out the most.
Do you recommend practices for people cultivating these resources ahead of time before there's a major stressor or an emergency?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, to me, resilience is so much, there's sort of the two stages. There's the preventive piece, and then there's the responsive piece. And I think, there's always going to be things that happen in life. But can we have a core solid foundation to respond effectively? And to me, things that fall into that category, obviously, are some of the basics, like, are we sleeping? Are we eating? Are we moving? But I think also things like, are we remembering to be present? Are we either in informal or formal ways practicing mindfulness? Are we practicing gratitude? Are we cultivating relationships with people that matter to us, that we can reach out to? And that can kind of give us that preventive piece. Not that life isn't going to throw us curveballs and we're going to have moments where we feel like we're falling apart. That's life. But I think if we can kind of add that infrastructure in place and have that solid foundation, it goes a long way to help us respond more effectively.
Mm-hmm. Then do you have recommendations for yourself or for people when you really are stuck and kind of overwhelmed and the resilience is nowhere to be found?
Yeah. Well, two things that come to mind in those moments for me. The first has to do with something that I know is just super near and dear to your heart in terms of what you teach people like myself, is around self-compassion. In my experience, both personally and professionally, when we are stuck, so much of the time that inner critic comes out. So much of the time we begin to beat ourselves up. We feel like we are, doing everything wrong. And I think pausing in those moments to just allow ourselves to be human and to give ourselves that same degree of kindness, of caring, of present moment focus, and compassion that we would just so readily often give other people, I think for me really jumps out as something that in those stuck moments is crucial. And I think also in those stuck moments, we get lost so much in our own head and our own stuff, that I think reaching out to others becomes really crucial too. To me, I'll speak for myself. When I find my kind of hamster wheel of the mind going over and over again, and I'm stuck in that moment, I can't think my way out of that situation. That's a cue. That's a sign of, we need to be leaning on others, even when it's not easy, even when we don't want to. We have to reach out.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
So in our last few moments here, do you have any additional thoughts or insights about resilience from your own experience? Are there things important to resilience that we might not often think about or associate with resilience?
Yeah, a couple of things. And for one thing, I think just it's been a learning process for me just on a human level, but I really try to impart this with people that I work with too, is to really think of resilience, and we're starting to get there, I think, societally and in the field, but as a skill. That I think so often initially we think of, based on how we were raised or just luck of the draw, some people have it and others don't. But I think what we're seeing more and more of that is it's a muscle of the mind that wherever we're starting off, we can all learn to be more resilient tomorrow and in the future than we are today or how we've been. So I think really reminding ourselves that this is a practice, this is a skill, this is There's ups and downs, but to have that intention of continuing to work on these things. I think something that's not often associated with resilience per se, at least in my read of things, but that I think is important, at least for me, is humor and fun and play. And these are the sorts of things that I think as adults we sometimes even forget, but that just the importance of play, the importance of having fun, whether it's in our personal lives or whether it's at work. I think those things give us the foundation as well to really respond when the stressful moments come more effectively. So those are a couple things that jump out to me that maybe aren't traditionally as much thought of as part of it, but to me are pretty crucial.
Mm. I very much appreciate how you've sort of covered the full range of resilience practice here, from very minor bumps or wobbles all the way through to things that are truly potentially traumatizing, and being able to come out the other side of that. So thank you very, very much for your thoughts, your wisdom, your warm heart. So glad to be here with you today.
So glad to be here with you too. Thank you so much.
So these conversations will be archived on my website, lindagraham-mft.net. May they be truly useful to you and yours.